So hello, welcome everybody. I'm Trent Blizzard and I'm here with Kristen Blizzard in the background. She's answering the chat. I encourage you to chat during this webinar and we will be answering those questions. Kristen knows all about this as much as I do, so feel free to pop questions in the chat for her to answer. You can put them in the Q&A. I see those and I'll try to answer them as we go, but I cannot promise that I get those answered. Kristen may move some over to the Q&A for me if she wants me to talk about them for everybody, or she may just drop me a note right here and let me know that way too if there's something I should make sure I answer. So tonight we're going to talk about Burn Morels, and we're going to focus on the Western U.S. And I want to thank NAMA for letting us do this and inviting all the NAMA members. We have about probably 1/3 of you are NAMA members and 2/3 are not. It's a free webinar for everyone though. So welcome aboard. All right, let's see here. So I will pop over here to the first slide and talk a little bit about us. Kristen and I, we live in Oregon right now, Greensport, Oregon on the coast. We have lived in Colorado for many years and also spent a lot of time in northern Wisconsin, but we have been chasing these Burn Morels for about 10 years now. And they started as kind of really a vacation for us. And we would do all this research over the winter, and I really got into it, looking at maps and trying to find burns and mapping out the places that we would go to find these, which, by the way, we did the first trip we did to Michigan looking for morels, and they were really hard to find, and we were off, kind of missed the season a little bit. It was frustrating. And we're like, next year, let's go for these things we've heard about in the West, Burn Morels. So after doing a bunch of research, we drove out to Oregon on Memorial Day weekend and went to this place I'd found on maps. And at that point, I had my paper maps and I had drawn fire perimeters into my paper maps so I could tell where the fire was going to be, because you couldn't really get them online like you could now 10 years ago. And lo and behold, we got there and we stepped out of the car and we started finding morels. And we got like a whole big basket that first day, and we were hooked. We started coming out every year. We went to Oregon the first couple years, and then we started branching out and going to other states. And I started doing more and more mapping and kind of figuring out where we're going to go, because part of the success factor here is really kind of armchair research where you figure out where you're going to go before you get in your vehicle. And I started making these maps. I was using Google Maps and people were asking me for them and I share them. And then I started putting them online and selling them. And over the years, I've added all this other data to the maps, and I kind of editorialize on the fires and kind of talk about the ones I like the most and why I like them, and I rate them on a scale. So that's how this all got started for us. So there we are. We have our camper. We like to drag our camper around when we do this and camp in the woods where we can. Sometimes we stay in hotels, but pretty much we use our camper, and then we'll maybe go to an RV park every, couple days and hook up and dry our morels there with electricity. We bring a bunch of little dryers with us to dry them. And we bring our dogs. That's Lulu and Benzie. Lulu's the black one. They love running around the birds and chasing morels with us. All right. So enough about us. Let's get into the burns. These are some of the burns we've been to in the last 10 years. As we've traveled around, we've mostly hunted in Oregon and Colorado, Idaho, and Montana. We have less experience in Washington, California, and we are still wanting to go to New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah are on our list. And we've never been to Canada. So I'm not going to talk a lot about Canada today. I don't really have the knowledge there to really drop any good inside information. But in some ways, it's just, I think, an extension of either the Rockies or an extension of the Pacific Northwest as you go up in there. So let's see. Now, why Burn Morels? Like, why are they so fascinating? And why are there so many of you on here tonight to watch about Burn Morels? Well, number one is they're very predictable. They grow in burns, and they like certain types of trees. And if you go into the right environment, if you can find it on a map and go into it, I don't want to say you're guaranteed, but you have a very high likelihood of finding morels. So in some ways, it's a lot less frustrating than what we call the natural morels, where you have to have your secret spots. And maybe when you get there, they uh, uh, they may or may not be there. So they're very predictable in that sense. And the second reason is this idea of quantity, like, oh my gosh, there's so many of them. We you know, you can get a handful, you can get a basket, but really we're talking buckets. And today when I talk about Burn Morels, I'm really focused on this idea of abundance, and I want to give you tips on how you fill a bucket. I'll talk about sometimes like, oh, you're going to find some here, but maybe they're not as reliable. Let's talk about how you can get so many that you just have to get out of the woods because you've filled your baskets in 2 hours or 3 hours, and you need to get back and process them or unload them and go get more because they're so heavy. There's no secret spots here. That's another thing I love, and you know, doing the maps. Like I don't do maps for natural morels with secret spots. These burns are public information. They're out there. They change every year. They're no big secret, and they're kind of fun to share in that sense. And there's not a lot of mushrooms we hunt where we feel that way, where I would get on and do a webinar and invite 500 people to kind of learn where we hunt. So that's a really unique quality. We consider it in many ways a destination hunt, and I would encourage many of you to like take a vacation, go to a destination, spend 2, 3, 4 days there, and really explore that fire and find those morels. It's a wonderful vacation. So there's that. As opposed to most morel hunters, I think around the country, they're really trying to find them close to their house. They're bopping out to their favorite spot in the afternoon and picking some morels. These are often more of a journey and more of a trip. You're going to spend a lot more on gas. You're going to spend all day, if not all weekend or all week, doing it as you go. If you're lucky enough to have a really nice burn near you, I say lucky, I mean, nobody wants forest fires near them, but if you have one near you, you can hunt close. That's a lot of fun too, but most of us don't have that. Now, I put late season there. I should have really said long season. Burn morels have a very long season. We start finding them really at the end of March, not in great quantities. In April, they start picking up, and they go through May. And at some point, depending where you are, they might peak in May or June or July. We've picked them well into August, and it's a very late season hunt. Often people will get a little frustrated with burn morels and say, oh, I've been out looking, I can't find them. And, you know, and I heard this just a couple of days ago from somebody, and I was like, it's like May 1st. It's kind of early to expect to find them right now in most of the country. So they're really good for the late season. And I think what happens is a lot of people have kind of lost their morel fever by the time the burn morels are starting. So many of you, it's June or July, and you've moved on to whatever you do in June or July, and you're not really thinking about morels. And that's when they might be peaking out here in the West, is in those months. I see some questions coming in about timing for certain burn areas. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk a lot about timing today. All right, so that's some of the reasons why we want to do burn morels, and on that I'm going to talk about really strategy today and not serendipity. Like, how do you go out and have a plan to find these? How do you apply what you know and apply modern data to them to really optimize your chance of finding them versus just walking into areas and walking around till you know you find something. So today's all about strategy, not serendipity. So let's start with, before we talk about where they are, and after that, we'll talk about when you find them, and then we'll talk kind of specifically how to research a specific burn. We'll dive deeper into that. I want to talk about burn morels themselves. First of all, they only grow in conifer forests, with very few exceptions. And I'm going to say that it's important to note the exception is not what we're talking about here today. Like, often somebody will share, I found them growing with some deciduous tree somewhere, and be like, yeah, but there's no strategy here. That's called serendipity. So they're only going to be in conifer forests. They're only going to grow in the Western US. Now, that said, they definitely do grow in the East, and I'm going to mention that a little bit later on, what I know about Eastern morels, and I think we're going to find Eastern burn morels. I think we're going to learn more about those too in the next couple of years, as more hunters kind of hone in on how to find them in the east. And they only grow after a fire. And that's one of the things that's really interesting is if you go to the exact same forest and you log it or cut it down, well, let's say if you go to the exact forest and there's been no fire, you're not going to find these morels. And if you log it and cut it down, you're not going to find these morels either. You'll find morels maybe, but there'll be a different species of morels. They're not called burn morels. By the way, out here in the West, those are called logging morels or disturbance morels, and they're often Morchella snyderi, I believe, which are not burn morels. So they're not morels that are also found somewhere where it burned. Like if you find a fire pit and you find some morels around it, that's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about forest fires and acres and miles and buckets and where entire habitats might be burning. So that's what we're talking about here today with burn morels. So I'm really specific about that. When somebody finds a morel in a place where it happened to burn, that doesn't necessarily make it a burn morel. And probably if you DNA tested it, it indeed is not. So I think these are the species that you're going to find out there. And I think in the next couple of years with all the DNA testing, we know the morel species and the way they're classified and the way they're named has really changed in the last 10 years. And I think the burn morels are still a bit of a mystery. I think they're still gathering a lot of these out and around and classifying them. So I think this may change a little bit as we learn more over the next couple of years. But really there's 5 burn morel species. And I'm really only interested in a couple of these even. So I'm going to say the first 2, the Morchella sextulata and Morchella eximia, are very, very common. I think that's what most of these are in this picture right here in the bag are these types. You can't tell those 2 apart from each other, I don't think, without DNA testing them. I don't know, you can really tell them with a microscope either. They're difficult to tell. This Brunea, it is found in burns. I'm not sure that I've ever found it. I don't think it's that common. I mention it because it is a burn morel. The exuberance, the number 4 on the list, is a very common burn morel. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And I'm going to talk about the tomentoso, really the cream of the crop, the one we love the most. I have a link in here on our website all about burn morels. I think if you just Google it, like burn morel species or modern forager all about burn morels, I have a whole post on these species with lots of links to research if you really want to dig into the species. So let's start though real quick with just the sextulata and the eximias. These are very, very common. They're really hard to tell apart. I think these all 4 are that species. I think it's interesting. The one on the right here, you'll notice the way the ridges are not orderly. They're really chaotic. And the one to the left of that has a very orderly ridges. So I'm wondering what that one directly to the left is. And then over, you can see the ridge lines on those. But they have thin stem walls. They're very light. They dry up real quick. And you have to pick a lot of them to get a lot of weight, but they tend to be a lighter one in weight, but certainly delicious. Now, the next one I want to mention specifically is the exuberance. I capitalized the E there, probably shouldn't have. That's not correct technically. But one thing of note, these are the ones when they find them in eastern burns, these tend to be the ones that are found. And I should also, I'm going to go back a slide. This sextulata is the one that also I think is the one that's cultivated in especially in China. The burn morels tend to be the ones that are being cultivated as well. So, and I think maybe they're trying to do that with this exuberance as well. But if you are finding them in the east, this is the species that seems to DNA test out in the eastern forest. It is thicker than the eximia and the sextulata. And I put a couple pictures right in here if you want to look at them. You can see the stem has this really folded folds in the stem and like a double stem wall. And you can see they're kind of close together, but there's 2 walls in that stem, and then it gets down to the bottom and it kind of convolutes and folds. This is one of the features typically of an exuberance. I don't know that I'm always really even 100% positive on these. These are hard to tell apart. And Most of us don't really care. They still taste as good. They're going to dry a little longer though because of the thickness of the stems. They're going to take a little more time in your dehydrator. Now, I'm always wondering, are they early or are they late? I feel like sometimes they're like the first one out, but often they're the third one out. Not the last, but I think it can kind of, maybe it comes out twice. I'm not really sure. But the interesting thing about all these species are that in a Western fire, you might find all 4 or 5 of these fruiting, and they're going to fruit successively. So I think that's part of the reason why we can have such a long season in any given place. Because, for example, we were in Colorado a few years ago at a fire that was near where we lived, so we were able to visit it starting in May all the way through August, and the early ones popped up right around the probably the 7th, 8th, 9th of June is when we started finding. It was a very cold spring that year. There was a lot of snow, so it was probably 2 weeks later than a normal year, but early June. And we were able to really stay within a pretty close elevation range from about 8,500 to 9,000 feet. And we were able to pick all the way through June. So we got and into July. So there was probably 6 weeks where there were at least 3 fruitings that came up in the same place. So we would pick and we'd work uphill, and then a week later we would pick the same area, but there'd be fresh morels next to old ones that we hadn't picked. And then 2 weeks later, a whole nother batch came up. So, and they were different species coming up successively. So often you may catch the first flush or a middle flush or the late flush. Now, talking about the late flush, this Morchella tomentosa has a lot of different nicknames. Fuzzy foot, because it has little hairs in its stem wall, is probably the prize. It is the last one that fruits, and it really likes the warmer soil temps near the kind of end of the season. And it's also generally, I would say, the biggest. It definitely weighs much more. If you go out and 2 weeks earlier and pick some of these other species, and then you come back and just pick the tomentosa, the tomans we like to call them, and you put the same amount in your bag will be significantly heavier on your shoulder because they weigh so much more. They're such a thicker morel, and when you eat them, they have considerable more like mouthfeel and even heavier in that sense. So they're really beefy. And here they are, kind of from young to old. I've laid them out. This was a picture that was taken, I want to say, approximately July 10th. And this was taken in Idaho. Now, some more pictures here just to confuse the matter. These are the same species, we think. Maybe there'll be some more DNA testing that will prove this difference. But the black ones on the right are the way they normally present when they're young. They start real dark, even black like that, like coal black. And then they turn lighter over time. But on the left, there's some real light colored ones that are also tomentosa. So they can also be real albino-ish in their colors and stay white. Often they seem to go from dark to light. So if I go back a slide, you can see up on the top row, the first couple, they're pretty dark. On the far left, there's a really dark gray one with a dark gray stem. The stem lightens up. And then on the bottom row, you can see them getting lighter with time. So the other thing, tomentosa means hairy. And here's a big light colored one in a hand here. And I zoomed in on that little black one, and I zoomed in on this one in this picture here. I put a little arrow. If you look real close, you're going to see little hairs coming out of the ridges of these mushrooms. Even when they get older, there's still like either little hairs, or you can kind of tell where they were there. So this is the real telltale sign about these. Now, I do see people asking about greenies and pickles. Sometimes they have pinks and conicas. All those friendly names are given to these mushrooms by pickers, and I'm never really sure what they're talking about, because they can any of these can kind of go pink or go green or go black. It seems like that naming convention is a little difficult. I think the early, I don't know. I'm not even going to say which ones are which, because when I talk to different pickers, they're like, oh yeah, the Conicus came up, and then the greenies, or the greenies came up, and then the pinks, and who knows what species it is, Peter? That's hard to say with these friendly names. However, the tomentosas are very unique, and those are the ones that you can always be sure when people are talking about them, that that's what they're finding. And they're also a reason why, if you're going to go after these, you might want to go later in the season. Now, the tomentosas, they also tend to fruit more reliably in higher elevations, definitely later in the year. We don't find them as much at lower elevations, maybe where it didn't get really cold over the winters and hold a lot of snow. So all things being equal, you're going to find those, I think, better in Idaho and Montana and Colorado at high elevations, and say closer to the coast in Washington and Oregon. And not to say you won't find them. We had our friend Joe, who found 3 or 4 little beauties at like 1,000 feet in elevation down here near the coast. And that was probably like 3 weeks ago. Very unusual find. But that's not normal. Usually you're going to find them, they're going to be the last one to flush at these higher elevation burns, and they like the warmth in the soil. I think they're a challenge in a lot of our western spots, because often by the time you get to, say, late June or July or August, it's really dried up. So they may never come because the dry weather didn't come. However, a good example, like we were picking just huge quantities of these in middle of August in Colorado at 10,000 plus feet. And we didn't go back, but our friends told us they picked them into September above 10,000 feet. So that's fun to find mushrooms, morels like this in August. And you'll see, if when we share pictures, a lot of times the best pictures of these are really from really late in the season. So they're pretty neat. We love those. Now, we're going to move on to where to find these. And this is a picture of the fires this year in Oregon. And I think the initial challenge here is there's just too many fires to kind of really easily, if you're new to this, to kind of narrow in. So I'm going to start with that. I'm going to bop off of this presentation and go over to a map here of North America. Actually, I should probably bop over to this map. Shows all of North America, and it shows all, I'll wait on that. I'm going to start here with the regions where we hunt. So what I've done is highlighted some of the regions. I'm going to just talk through them and just generalize about them. And I'm going to start here along the coast. And these 2 regions in Washington, Oregon, and Northern California, they are crest to crest. So you're talking the crest on the west, the crest of the coastal mountain range, and on the east, you're talking about the crest of the Cascades, especially. And I guess in California, the Cascades, that's not the Cascades, that's some other forest in there. I don't know what that's called right there. It's not the Sierras quite either yet at that point. And I've divided these up separately because they are very different ecosystems. So how you might approach them might be different. But this will be crest to crest, and this is going to be probably the first places that are gonna fruit. They start theoretically in late March, and they'll start picking up through April. And as you go further east and go up into the higher elevations in the Cascades, they're going to probably get better and better and better. So I do like to say you can pick mushrooms in these 2 zones, and you can pick close to the coast, but they're not as reliable, they're not as abundant, and the likelihood of you walking out of the woods with all you can carry is really a lot slimmer than in some of these other places. However, if you can get 10 pounds in April, who's going to complain, I guess. Now, the next range here is a little more classic. This is going to be the Cascades, and this is going to be the lower Klamath Basin, and here kind of between the Sierras down here in California and the Cascades. These are going to pick pretty well all through the summer, and they're probably going to really peak and be really good from late May to early June. But as you go higher in elevations, you can follow those up. We've seen, like for instance, in the Cascades, we've seen huge flushes happen in early July at the higher elevations. But that's usually where that's where we started going often around Memorial Day, was in the Cascades on the eastern side of the Cascades. In my opinion, the mushrooms, the Burn Morels, get better as you go down the eastern side of the Cascades. Down here in this Klamath Basin, there's a lot of different habitats, so it's hard to generalize, but elevation is going to rule there. And down in the Sierras, the same thing. As you get up higher and higher, you're going to be able to pick from May into June, into July. And if you get rain into August at some of the higher elevations in these areas. Now, obviously, as you go south as well, you tend to get warmer weather. So they're going to follow all the way down here. You can see at the bottom of this range, you can find them all the way down here in Southern California. But no, those are high mountains, and they're under snow right now. So that's a good sign. Any place that has snow into early May is probably going to hold Burn Morels in end of May or June. So there we go. Just looking over at the chat. Peter, you're talking about greenies. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm going to just say, Peter, I'm not sure what species they're talking about there. So, I think when you give those mushrooms friendly names, they get tricky. But I'm not sure what a triple walled mushroom is. The tomentoses are definitely the fattest, the thickest, the heaviest, and they are not green. So those are the gems. So without a doubt, and I don't think anybody's going to contradict that, that has picked them all. Now, as we go further east, this is the Blue Mountains, and it feels like as you go further east, often you pick later in the season. I think the Blues are probably closer to the Cascades. They are, they start probably mid-May and go through mid-June, and the Blue Mountains are an awesome place to pick. It's really nice over here, and I think it's interesting to note as you head east too. You get into these drier locations, and it seems like the Burn Morels love dry areas. Like they really thrive in places that get stressed for rain. But if you can find a place that gets stressed for rain, but also has some kind of moist areas, that's where they really do well. It's kind of odd. And that's why I think a lot of times we're looking at certain, north-facing exposures in these areas that's going to hold more water, maybe cedar trees or fir trees that are signs that hold more water. And a lot of these places as you get east here, even looking at two hillsides, a north and a south, the north and the south hillsides are going to have totally different types of trees on them because there's such a difference in the heat and the moisture between the two. So as you go back to the west here, it's really wet. And I think as you go north, if you follow this map north into the Olympic Peninsula, Vancouver Island, or along the coast here, you're not going to find very good Burn Morel scenes there. I'm not going to say you would never find them, but not many. And I think it's like too wet. They don't like 30 or 50, 60, 70 inches of rain. They don't like to grow in mossy, wet areas. They need to somehow get a little bit of a dry spell to really grow well. I don't know why. So the Blues offer that, where you can go there in mid-May, late May, and find some real moist areas that were covered in the snow had melted a month ago, and just really clean up. It's a wonderful area. Moving east, then we kind of have over here the Northern Rockies. It's a huge area, has a lot of wildfires, has a lot of awesome trees, high elevations that are often still holding snow. I mean, right, people are still skiing in a lot of these places right now, and lots of mushrooms. I feel like when we would come out on Memorial Day weekend and pick, we would often be on if we had our kind of druthers, we'd be on the eastern slope of the Cascades on Memorial Day weekend, doing pretty well, but picking maybe the second flush. As we would move into the Blue Mountains, it feels like around the same time we'd be picking the first flush. And then when we go into Idaho and Montana, we would be like a little bit early. We'd be trying to find that first flush. oh, we got to go lower and lower and lower to find it. And then in Colorado, and around the high elevations around Yellowstone here, and the Southern Rockies, like even later, because it was too soon there for any flushes yet. So it feels like as you go out into this area, it gets later and later. I had a couple of other little odd ones here I'll talk about. I have this spot here, the Black Hills. The Black Hills is probably the easternmost area that will hold Burn Morels and the conifer trees there. I think it's a little harder to pick as you get to this far eastern edge. You have to have a lot more kind of expertise to find them here, but they definitely find them in the Black Hills. Now down here in Colorado, right here in the Rockies, man, they're awesome there at high elevation. Typically above 8 or 8,500 is where we would usually find them, with Engelmann spruce and subalpine fir. However, there are reports of them also growing at lower elevations with ponderosas occasionally in good numbers. A little harder though. I'm going to talk about trees in a bit. Now, finally, we've got Arizona. Arizona is really cool. Arizona has massive fruitings of Burn Morels. I think they happen a little sooner down there. I'm going to say end of May, early June. At the higher elevations, you're going to want to probably be above 6,000 feet, preferably even 7,000 feet. Where, down in the White Mountains down there, north and south of the Grand Canyon, it is a kind of high elevation conifer forest, and they're drier, but they're still, if they're not holding snow now, they were not very long ago. And once that snow melts, and same thing in a lot of these really dry places, same with Colorado, I feel like the snow is going to say it's going to be melting now in Arizona, or maybe in 2 weeks in Colorado at that elevation. Typically, there's a good month before the Burn Morels will come up, because they happen later than the naturals at the same elevation. So there's a solid month. After the snow melts. And usually if you don't get some rain in between the snow melt and when you think the morels are going to come up, they don't do very well. So often in these drier habitats, we're really looking now in May, we're looking for a good rain. And if you find in any of these spots, if you find a really big rainstorm come through, like even a couple of inches, or maybe over the course of a week, some steady rain, you can pretty much count that, come after that. It might be a week, it might be 2, it might be 3. You can count on Burn Morels popping up. If the conditions are right, often a rain will drop the soil temp, and it might take a week for the morels to burst. If conditions are, if the rain is not cold, they might burst immediately after the rain, or even if it's a little bit warmer and then boom, you bring the temperature down to make it right again, they might burst immediately. So rain in these dry areas can do a lot. And part of like your planning is we found is when you commit to going to one burn, like, okay, friends, we're going to meet you at so-and-so in Idaho. Invariably, you're like, oh man, there's better rain in Montana. There's better rain in Oregon or Washington. It's often best to find a time that you can do this and kind of keep your options open and start looking at the rain and the weeks leading up to when you're going to go and go where there's rain is a good way to do it. Okay, so I'm just looking at the questions here. We're going to talk about tree species. Yes, we're going to talk about tree species. Kristen, I might need you to feed a couple questions over in the Q&A. I see them buried here in the chat. I don't know if I can keep up with them. So if you see any coming up, please feed them over to me. Okay, so now I'm going to come back to the presentation, and I was like, hey, there's too many fires. I want to come back. I want to look at the big picture of the country, where you're going to find them. By the way, in the East, they have been found up in the upper Midwest and also in the Appalachian Mountains. And stay tuned. I'll be publishing a blog post on that, hopefully in the next week, and I'll talk about what the secrets may be in those areas. I don't want to get into it here because it's more guessing. This one I'm trying to share like what I actually know about these things. So here we are in Oregon with too many fires. Oh, I did have one where not slide. I think if you're in Northern California, I'm going to add this to our Burn Morel maps, maybe this season here in the next week or two, but definitely before next season. This is a map of what's called serpentine soils. And it is a certain type of geology in Southern Oregon and Northern California along the coast. I shouldn't say along the coast, along the close to the coast. Where the morels don't grow. So often when we look at Northern California, a lot of the fires often are touching these zones or half in or half out, and you're going to want to avoid these zones. For some reason, the morels don't like the geology in these areas. Curiously, a lot of the trees we're after too don't really like them. So you can usually tell by looking at them that they don't have some of the trees that we're really, really focused on. But I'll be adding that to our Burn Morel maps next year to make it easier for people. And I think that accounts for also why in this area of the country, often people have really mixed results. Some people like, I've just been looking and looking and looking and not finding any. And other people will find a whole bunch nearby. And I think it's because of whether they're in and or out of this serpentine soil zone is what matters. And you can Google it, it's a thing. This whole serpentine soil phenomenon is pretty interesting. All right. Debbie asked, that map, this Burn Morel map of the regions is kind of just my map. What I can do though, I think I can share that. I'll just copy this link and I'll post it into the chat here of just the general zones. I don't know if it's really that useful for anybody, but that's just the general regions that I kind of drew out here to talk about where you might find them. Other things in common with these regions, they all offer high elevation and they all offer conifer forests. If you look at the places that aren't highlighted, they don't offer those two things. And the third thing they all offer really is snow and snowpack, with kind of the exception of maybe the far western edge of this kind of coast to coast range. Most of these others are going to be holding significant snow over the winter. So that's something they have in common. All right, so that was the where not, okay? So now I'm going to talk about kind of where to look. And we're still starting really big. We're going to narrow down. I'm going to get to trees in a bit, but I'm going to have to talk about our maps. I'm going to spend a lot of time in the maps that Kristen and I create and share. We do have a discount code if you want to, a coupon code if you're looking to buy them. We have a $9 discount. It's good till May 15th. And the code is just NAMA. Capital N, capital A, capital M, capital A, NAMA. And we charge $39 for these maps. We charge $25 to renew the maps each year once you're a member. And if you want them this year, you can get them for $30 with the coupon code that we're offering. So when you're doing your research and you're figuring out where to go, you're going to want to look at, first and foremost, can I hunt on this land? Is it public? And really, the vast majority of land that we're hunting on is U.S. Forest Service. And you can pick in 99 out of 100 of these spots you can pick, and they all have permits. I'm going to talk about permits a little later. What you're going to want to avoid, though, is certainly any national park, any tribal land, any private land. You're going to want to avoid those. I think in Colorado, you have to avoid state land, although there's not really a lot of high elevation state land. So in our maps here, if we come over to the mushroom map, I'm just going to pop this out. I'm going to turn on the fire perimeters, which will light up all the 2024 fires across North America. I do not have the Northwest Territory, the Yukon, or Alberta yet. I hope to have those in here soon. The Canadian data is a little harder to get. I have Washington, but I'm going to zoom in here to the kind of US portion. And let's take a look. I think we'll open this back up. And the way it works in here is you pick a state where you want to go. I don't put all of the data in here on, it's too much to put all the states in at once. There's so many fires. I have all the Western states at the top. It's not an alphabetical order, but most of the times we're not looking for Alabama, right, or Arkansas. So I'm going to pick Washington. And what it's going to do is going to show me all the Washington fires. We'll zoom in on that. And then you can pick them here. And there's too many. I've rated them A, B, and C. And I like the A fires, obviously. There's not as many this year as in past years. And I have 4 A-rated fires here, and then there's quite a few B-rated fires. I'm quick to tell you, the B-rated fires can be excellent. So when we talk about what makes an A fire, it's got to have a lot of public land. It's got to be accessible. So you got to be able to hunt on it on public land. It has to be accessible with the roads. Usually I want it to be pretty big, not like a 10-acre, a 20-acre, 100-acre fire. I want it to be hundreds, if not thousands or tens of thousands of acres. And it has to have good forest on it, good trees is often the thing. So I go through, and what I do is I look at every fire on a satellite map and on a topo map, and I rate them based on that. And places like Arizona, often they're not high enough elevation, so I'll rate them lower. And they might have trees, but I know they don't grow in, say, juniper trees or, scrub oak. So I knock those out and I rate those fire D fires. So I think what I'll show you here is I have a land ownership section, and you can turn on federal land and state land and find places where you can hunt. Let's take a look at the, let's see. Let's zoom in here and look at this fire right here outside of Spokane. Whoops, I zoomed too quick there. Here's an example of a B-rated fire. And the reason this fire here is going to be B-rated, even though it has a lot of nice trees on it, and if you come up and look at the satellite view, you can see there's a lot of sections that look pretty promising. The real problem is there's not a lot of public land in here. And I think if you have access to private land, there could be a lot in here, but otherwise you're going to have to pick a few of these spots. So I didn't rate this an A fire because I didn't feel like it justified the land. And even down here, this fire down here, I rated a D. And it doesn't really have hardly any public land on it at all. And it's low elevation and didn't have the right trees. So this federal land right here can help you determine whether or not you can hunt on these fires. Now, there's a lot of federal land. I mean, you're not going to have a problem finding good places to hunt based on that. There's plenty of fires. I think on that same note, you're also going to want to look and avoid tribal, and you're going to want to look and kind of maybe understand whether it's like a wilderness designation, because often you can't hunt in a wilderness zone. So let's see here. If I turn on tribal, we'll just see real quick, that'll light that up, and I can kind of lower these, and there's the tribal, and you can see, like, for example, right up in here, there's a really nice fire maybe, or down in here, there might be fires. Like this one looks like I shouldn't have even rated it a B. It looks like it's in a fire, and I should have rated it a D. But if I come down here and pick all, what you'll find are there's a lot of fires inside of these tribal areas that you're going to want to totally avoid. You cannot hunt in those at all, unless somehow you're able to achieve a special permit, which is rare, but it does happen. However, maybe we'll look instead at, let's look at Idaho, which has a lot of wilderness area. And I'm going to turn this down. I'm going to come up and turn off these filters. And down in here in these D-rated fires, there's a lot of them that look like they could be pretty good. And indeed, as you come in here, what you're going to often find is that a fire like this, D, Elkhorn, it's a big fire. It looks very promising, right? However, if you come up here, and I'm going to just reduce that, and I'm going to put the U.S. Forest Service topo map, which is what I use for most of my research and where I spend most of my time. And you zoom in, you're going to see this is the Nez Perce Forest, but it's a giant wilderness area right here. The Frank Church something sideways. The Frank Church river of no return wilderness is what this is. And upon further looking around, you're going to be like, oh, wow, there's no roads in here either. This would be a wonderful place to hunt, but you can't get to it. And even if you could get to it, it's against the law to hunt in this wilderness area. So pay attention to that when you're studying your maps. If you see a fire that just looks really good and maybe even hike into it, if it's a wilderness area, you typically can't hunt there. So you're going to want to use the Forest Service to determine any designations that matter, and the land ownership to find places that are federal. Now, the other thing that can really get you in some of these is sometimes there's like a fire in a really nice fire that's in a national park. I don't know if that is or not, but you're going to want to avoid the national parks for sure. I think in any of the areas where we find burn morels, it's totally against the law to hunt in national parks, and you will get fat fines. And you'll be in a lot of trouble if you pick burn morels in national parks. I think maybe you can pick them when you're camping and eat them while you're there. You can forage while you're on site if you're camping, but you definitely can't take out buckets full of them. So Mike asked, why can't you hunt in the wilderness? It's against the law in most wildernesses to harvest anything and take it out. You can't go in and cut firewood. You can't, harvest plants or animals. Maybe animals you can, but it's just against the law to harvest in wilderness areas. I think there might be one or two around the country that allow it, but it's pretty rare. So I've always marked the fires in wilderness areas as Ds. Okay. So that is, what are we on here? What topic? We are on looking at wilderness and special designations, trying still big picture to figure out like why some fires are better than others. You may wonder if fires are closed. The only way to tell if a fire is closed to public access is to go to the US Forest Service website for that particular forest. And every Forest Service website has a notification page, which will list closures and also provide maps. So you're going to have to look kind of not just state by state, but you have to look forest by forest, whether a fire is open or closed. And I know in California, especially, they close them. Oregon, increasingly, they've been closing them. So far, it seems like Washington, Idaho, Montana, they haven't. They've closed some in Colorado in the past. So it's hard to say whether they're open or closed. And I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the future. It feels like they were really uptight about fires during COVID. And now they mark them as closed, but they often don't care. I don't know what the deal is with that, but pay attention. You don't want to get a ticket going into a closed fire. If you're frustrated by closed fires, you can also look at second year burns. Now, everything we're talking about today is first year burns, which are the best. However, second year burns will also fruit and even third year burns. And many hunters like to go to second and third year burns. We've had some really good luck in third year burns. I wouldn't say we filled a bucket, but we've definitely filled a basket with a lot of nice big fresh morels. And the funny thing or the cool thing about second and third year burns are nobody's ever in them. You have them to yourself. There's no competition, it seems like, for morel hunting in second and third year burn. So I would encourage you to consider going. They're also fun because in a first year burn, there hasn't been a lot of regrowth yet. You're really hunting in places that are damaged by the fire. In second and third year burns, often they're green, there's flowers, there's weeds, there's grass, there's more animals running around, there's more birds singing, there's just more activity in them, which can make it harder to see the mushrooms. They're often more well hidden in a second year burn. But it is still worth it, especially if it's one is convenient to you to go to a second year burn. Okay, so that was, is it closed? Okay, so now talk a little bit about some wins and seasonality, since there's such a long season. And the number one factor in the seasonality is what I talked about earlier, is kind of where you are in the country and recognizing that areas that are on the western side of the Cascades or the western side of the Sierras are going to be warmer than areas that are on the eastern sides of those mountains all the way to Colorado. The second element with seasonality is the elevation. And that's why an area with mountains can have a very long picking season, because they could start at, maybe in Oregon, they might start at 1,000 feet here in end of March. And by end of May, we're up to 4,000 feet. And by July, we're up to 6,000 feet. So there's a pretty big range. And if you can find a big burn that offers large ranges, you can pick it for months. So the elevation will matter. And when you pick your times to go somewhere, and try to find the morels, you're often moving up and down an elevation, trying to figure out, like, where are they at? So if you come to, say, Oregon, and you're in the western slope of the Cascades, you might be at between 4,000 and 5,000 feet in May, but they might all be at 4,500 feet. And if you go down to 4,000, you don't really find any, or maybe you find really old ones and rotten ones. And if you go up to 5,000 feet, you don't really find any of it. Maybe you find some really small, fresh ones that have not really matured yet. So you can move around that way. Longitude would be, how far north or how far south you are. Obviously, as you go down to Southern California, it warms up more, all things being equal, than it does in northern Montana. So that can affect the seasonality. And finally, the aspect is pretty big. As you go from north to south, it's like artificially changing your elevation by maybe 500 feet. So if you are in the mountains, whether you're north or south can affect the season in a big way. I almost always say, like, oh, I love a northern exposure. I love an eastern and western, but probably eastern the most, because the eastern exposure, as you work it, has a lot of north and south facing gullies. So you have areas that get a little more sun and a little less sun, but all in all, east is a little bit on the moist side. So often east is my primary choice. But early in the season, like when we went out at the very end of March and the first 2 weeks of April out here in Western Oregon, we were all about the southern exposures. Like, everything was southern exposures. There was plenty of moisture. It was the heat we were after. So if you're in the early season, you're going to want to look for southern exposures. And you might even want to look in sunnier spots, where there might be a phenomenon where a little bit lower at the bottom of the valley, they won't start yet. They'll actually start a little bit higher, maybe where the sun can get in a little better, or maybe where a road has gone through, where there's even more southern exposure, where there's a road that runs east-west. So there's the sun can come right into and hit those southern slopes. You might find them there first. Also early in the season, we might find them next to a log or a boulder, where they're going to be on the southern side of that log, because the sun is hitting that log, reflecting a lot of heat, and that warms up first. Later in the year, you might find them on the other side of the log, where maybe it's a little moisture trap, and moisture is falling, the rain hits that log, it falls off, it holds more moisture under the log, it's shady under the log, especially the north side. So later in the season, you might find them on the other side of the log. So there's often little microclimates that are impacted by this idea of aspect, which is pretty important. So I know we're constantly paying attention and noting when we find them. Is it north-facing aspect? Is it south-facing aspect? Is it a shady spot? And even in this picture here, you can see there's a big obstruction, and these mushrooms are all growing right around the edge of this obstruction, in this case, in pine needles. That's another thing we're always noting. I don't know if you noticed that as you look through pictures. I'm always looking at the needles and trying to determine, like, oh, what kind of needles are those under that tree? Those look like ponderosa needles. Those look like spruce. Those look like fir. And I'm thinking these are growing right here because it is on a side of something where the water has rolled off of that, and it's holding water right there, and it's a north-facing side, so it's extra shady. And even here, you can see the way the shade is falling off the trees here, and the afternoon shade where they're getting it right there. So that's going to be the coolest spot in the forest. And this picture happened to be taken during a extra dry spell. So we were really focused on finding moist shady spots, and that's where we found the mushrooms. Okay, somebody's asking about the best soil and air temp window for starting to fruit, right? Good question. I think the problem with soil temp, and we do it. I have a ton of pictures of us sticking soil thermometers in the soil, is that it varies so dramatically. I don't know if you've ever tried it. First of all, from morning to afternoon to evening, the soil temp goes up and down 10 degrees. So when you say, what's the soil temp? You have to say, well, what time of the day? And then you have to say, well, is it at a shady spot or not? The soil temp goes up and down with the moisture levels in the soil too. And then how deep you stick your probe in has a huge factor. So if you have a 4-inch thermometer and you're sticking it in 4 inches versus 2 inches, you're going to get a pretty big variation in temperature. So I'm cautious to say what it is exactly, but I'm going to say once it starts hitting the high 40s and the low 50s, you're going to start seeing your first flush. The Morchella tomentosa are going to be much later than that. The temperature is going to be even higher, but it's not an easy answer on the seasonality when it comes to soil temperature. I don't know that the air temperature matters quite as much as the soil temperature. They certainly tend to fruit faster when it's warmer out. They grow faster. They'll go from little to full size in a couple of days if it's warm out, and it takes longer when it's cold. But I think it's the soil temp that is the top factor. And there's actually, I think if you look it up, it came out of Missouri. There was a guy that did some interesting research down there on natural morels, measured air and soil temps, and it was a soil temp that was the most indicative factor of when the fruitings happen. We often look for signs in nature on when we think they're fruiting, and that might be how tall the grass is on the side of the road. It might be flowers that are happening at the same time. It almost comes down to like a feeling. Sometimes it's easy to tell if it's too early because there's signs of snow melt. So I don't know if you've noticed, if you go in the woods after snow melt, the ground is very compacted. It's holding down. It's still like feels like there was snow sitting on top of it recently. It hasn't kind of rebounded up and things have started. And you can see here with these pine needles, there's all these fresh needles on top. This was not holding snow that long ago. So that can be a factor, but you start to kind of recognize the environment. And that's also tough because it depends where you are in the country. So, that yellow mule flower or whatever it is that might be in Western Oregon, might not be in Eastern Oregon. That really cool, bright, green, really vibrant green moss that's on the western side of the Cascades doesn't really happen in the Blue Mountains. So there's a lot of different indicators. It's not an easy single thing. Okay, so let's talk about snowpack when it comes to seasonality. One of the things I like to watch as I'm planning where to go, I'm going to come back to our maps here. I'm going to zoom in. Let's just turn off. I'm going to go to fire layers, and I'm just going to turn off Idaho, and I'm going to come up and just show a road map so we can kind of see where we're at. And in precipitation, I have a snow depth. I'll turn that up all the way. So this is really helpful snowpack. And the reason is anywhere there's snow, you're not going to find morels, like mic drop. Obviously, they don't grow under snow. And this map is pretty up to date. The snowpack map is pretty good. And I think it's probably because it's easy to kind of algorithmically determine snowpack using satellite photos. So it's pretty accurate. And many people will tell you how they find morels like near snowpack after snowmelt. I think they're talking about natural morels. We never see snow when we're picking morels. Like I want to say we never see snow when we're picking burn morels. We might find a little pocket of snow in a cave that's totally protected. Maybe a huge drift somewhere nearby that is still there. But the snow is pretty long gone. I want to say the snow's been gone a month before we find burn morels. But the snow that's there now can be really helpful to know whether you should go or not and when you might want to go. So you want to pay attention to it, especially if you're figuring out where you're going to go in a month. So let me just show you. I'm going to pick California. So we'll just zoom in and take a look where there's still pretty good snow there. Oops, a little too far. Still pretty good snow. I'm going to look at A-rated fires. And you can kind of tell, like if you're in California, these burns up here are, the snow is gone from them. And so they might be promising. Now, interesting, I think they had a little bit recently. Like I feel like there's a little more snow here than there was a week ago. They've had some precipitation in the last week. And we do have that. I'll show you the precipitation maps in a little bit. So these might be, if you're in California, where you want to go now. But if you come down to one of our A-rated fires here is this quarry fire, which is right next to the bone fire. They're the same almost. And if I'm going to make that so we can just see a little better, I'm just going to kind of reduce that so it's more transparent. Then you can see this fire is still under snow. So it's too soon for this. But I'm thinking these edges here in a couple of weeks are going to be worth checking out. And as you get up into here and it starts melting in a couple of weeks, you can check those out later. Once the snow has melted off. So it's going to be worth looking at these in a couple of weeks. So the snowpack is handy. Another example might be in Arizona. If we take a quick look at Arizona, snowpack really matters there, and they've lost most of theirs recently. So I'm just going to come in. I'll just come in here and I'm going to pick Arizona. And I'm going to just do the A-rated fires. So here they are. There's, 5 A-rated fires. And you can see from the snowpack is off of all these right now. So these are going to be ready to go. I'd love to see a big rain hit these sometime in the next 2 to 3 weeks, and then know like Arizona is going to just burst. But it tells me these are close. They're one good rain away from a major flush. Now there might be some snow in the northerly facing edges or the sides or really shady areas still, but there's not anything that they're seeing from satellite in here. So now I love this fire in here, this Three Lakes fire. If we zoom in on it, you can see it here. And you can see my notes on that. I rated that an A fire. And I talk about the elevation increases to the south. So often in Arizona, I'm trying to get up to higher elevations. And the fire is mostly northwest facing. That's a really good sign. It's facing mostly to the north as opposed to the south. There's a lot of road access. It's really promising. And the elevation range, it's 8,000 to 8,600. So it's very high, but it's also not a big variation. And it's pretty flat here. So the whole fire is huntable. You can pretty much walk the whole thing. It's not steep like some other parts of the country where there's fires. And if you come up, you can also pick the satellite view and you can zoom in and you can see kind of where the best trees are, kind of along this eastern area down here in the south. This western edge looks pretty good. This could be a wonderful place to hunt if they get hopefully one more good rain, I think is what would trigger this area to go. So it's a neat area. But long story short, use the snowpack map to plan and keep your eye on fires and when the snow melts. And then in an ideal world, especially in these drier locations, I'm gonna love if I see one good big rainstorm or a week of kind of steady rain. I know it's going to happen. That's my favorite thing to see. Are we doing okay on all the questions here? I think so. Okay, so let me just zoom back out, bring it back to normal here. And I'll go back to the roadmap. And I think precipitation is next. So that was snowpack. I've been talking about precipitation. Whoops. What I have here is on this map, I only have the 7-day precipitation. So, or the 3-day or the 1-day. The problem with a lot of precipitation maps out there are they tell you what it rained today. and they'll tell you that it rained, what it'll rain tomorrow, like the predictive. And they might even tell you what it rained in the last 30 days, which I like. But the problem with the last 30 days was if they got 3 inches, was that like yesterday? Was it 3 weeks ago? Was it a month ago? Like I care when it happened in the last 30 days. And you can see right now, I still have the Arizona fires highlighted. They haven't really gotten any rain in the last 7 days. And in the last 7 days, there's been some rain out here in the west. And it looks like just in the last 7 days, you can see here in California, they've gotten some decent rain. Not a lot. Green is half an inch. I want to see an inch or more, preferably red. But looking at this, I'm thinking some of these Northern California fires might be a good place to be in this next week, just because of that fresh rain. Often in California, they're really water starved, and the Morels really respond to that. But I'm going to want to watch this to see more. Now, I have a supplemental map, and it's the precipitation map. I think it's pretty unique. This is a kind of a labor of love I've developed. And what it is you can pick any place on this map. I'll zoom in. And let's just say we want to look down here near California. And you can pick a place. And over here on the left, it's going to show you the rain pattern for the last 6 weeks. So they had 1.5 inches of rain 6 weeks ago. And since then, nothing. And what I want to see is some more incremental rain happening right now. Now, I'm not too concerned about this yet. And the reason is a lot of these places we're going to want to hunt in the next month or 6 weeks, they still have snow on them. So I don't care about that. I'm going to wait until the snow has been gone a couple of weeks, and then I'm going to watch it. Because the other thing, I don't know that I really trust these precipitation maps. They often don't do a good job with snow. So, if you pick like this area spawned down here at Grants Pass and Medford, a lot of people hunt for naturals down there. If I go down and pick that right there, I can load that up and we can see like what's gone down in here for the last 6 weeks. And they had very little they have not in 6 weeks had barely 1 inch of rain. So it's been pretty dry here recently. Now, also up in here, if you want to get the big picture, I have this thing called mushroom problem. I'm going to turn all this off. And what I have is you can pick the week. So you can say, I want to see what happened in week 4, which was April 7th through April 13th. And you can see that for the whole country. So this works for those of you in the East too. And you can see where it rained. And then you can come up and go, well, let me see 3 weeks ago. And so you can kind of get snapshots of rain totals. Oh, look, there was a whole bunch in here back in looks like northern Montana that looked pretty promising. And down here in Utah, they got snow, or rain. You can kind of see what's happening. And then finally, as we progress later in the summer, this becomes more valuable. This is my mushroom probability layer. And what this does is it calculates the last 6 weeks. And it like gives you a half a point if you got a half an inch of rain. It gives you a point if you got a full inch of rain any week. And then it scores you on a scale of 1 to 6 on what the probability is of morels. And I've noticed when I look at this come Memorial Day and in June, it works pretty well. It really tells me where places have gotten kind of regular rains, and then I can dive further as opposed to just having one big snapshot. So I do like to watch the rain maps and try to travel to places that have good rain or know that they're there. If you're lucky enough to live near it, you don't need these maps. If you live in, Bozeman, you don't need to go look at this map to know what the rain is. But I don't. I want to know if I should go there in a couple of weeks or a month or not. This is a supplemental map. It is available over here in our, this is what you see when you log in, and it's right here. It's the supplemental precipitation map, and it's available to all of our members. I do not have this year's burns on it. I think I may add that here in the next couple of weeks, because it's nice to see the burns in the map. But that is available to our members as well, the supplemental. Otherwise, it's this kind of 1-3-7 day option. Okay, so that's precipitation. Let's go to, whoops, what happened there? Oh, it's just a big picture of a lot of morels. So there you go. Okay, so we're still diving deeper into maybe picking out which burn to go to or where to go into a burn. And I'm looking at three things. I'm generally looking at, are the trees good? Is it walkable? Often places that look promising are so steep that you can't hunt them. And I'm looking at like what the aspects are. I'm especially usually interested later in the season when I'm typically avoiding southern aspects. So what we've done here on these three concepts is made a Morel probability map. So let me see here. Let me bop in here to the maps. And I think I'll look at this quarry fire again in California. Even though it's under snow, I'll go California. And I'm going to pick A. And I'm going to go down and pick quarry just to get there real quick. We'll zoom in on that. Oops. And then I'm going to come up and I'm going to pick under optional overlay Morel probability. So this is kind of cool. This is something Kristen and I kind of invented. Basically, we take every acre. It's actually, I think, a 30-meter square. And we score it based on tree cover, the percentage of tree cover that's in there. We want that really high tree cover. And that I think it runs on kind of a scale of 1 to 7 is the highest you can get. Tree cover is the most important factor. The second most important factor is going to be, maybe they're tied, and it's going to be, we're looking at the aspect in there, whether it's like north facing or not. Let me zoom in. And how steep it is. I think steep is the second factor, because if it's over 30%, I kind of zero it out. I make it really hard. I don't like things over 30%. They're not safe to hunt. So according to this, you can see any of these yellows are like a perfect score. It means it's flat, there's a ton of trees, and it's north facing or east facing. And anything that is moderate, and that's from the dark green to the light green, are still pretty good. It's got even a score of 4 means you have a pretty good probability of hitting those. And this fire looks just excellent from this probability score. Now, as you get more experience, you don't really need this. Like, you can go look at the satellite picture and you can look at the topography maps and kind of figure this out on your own. But I built this as a way for people to kind of take a quick glance, including me, and just quickly evaluate a fire and go, wow, there's a lot of territory in this fire. Or other fires maybe say, wow, there's not a lot of territory in this fire. And when you get into like steeper areas, especially, or places without trees, let me see what these look like up here. You're going to see, like, here's an example of, I mean, this looks like it'd be a great place to be, but a lot of these places get low scores in here because they're too steep, or they don't have enough trees, or for whatever reason. So all things being equal, this fire is going to be a lot harder to hunt than the other one. So that's what the probability score is for, is to kind of quickly make it easy for you to evaluate a fire, whether it's good or bad. The tree cover is based on pre-burn tree cover. Okay. So that means what we're doing is that number is provided by the Forest Service, and they actually have a tree cover percentage, and we use their data. So it's not looking at like something that happens after the burn. I'll talk about that in a sec. So that is see if we have any questions on Morel probability. Okay. Oh, somebody said, yeah, this picture, there's a lot of morels. You don't pick that fast, but in this fire, you would have picked that many too. We went up that day. A bunch of us went into that fire, And we went in with we took a lot of people into this fire. They were all you could pick. And one of our friends came and he brought a 5-gallon bucket. And boy, he messed up. All he brought was a 5-gallon bucket. I should have put the picture in here. He followed us around carrying this 5-gallon bucket, and it was full. I mean, once you fill a bucket, you're kind of done. There were so many in this burn. And this is by the way, this is a big table. This is not, this is a table that seats like 10 people, and these are big mushrooms. So yeah, that was a pretty exceptional fire. Okay, so I think I have next tree species and burn severity. So I'm going to skip to burn severity because you asked, Deanne asked about that in here. The next thing we make are burn severity maps. And let's just pick a different fire because we want to mix it up. Let's go look at Oregon maybe. And we're going to look at A fires again. And the problem with burn severity is, especially in dry years, and last year was not the driest of years by any means. And you can kind of tell there's not as many fires last year as the previous year. The burns can be really bad. And when a fire burns something totally hard, we call it moonscape. It means there's no more shade. And it means the ground is black with ash. And that really means 3 things. Number one is we usually walk through it because we rarely find mushrooms in it. It means that when they are there, they are often ashy. Like if you find them in there, the rain has fallen on this black ash, which splashes the mushrooms, called ash splash, and they can be really dirty. Now, occasionally we have found massive amounts of mushrooms in heavily burnt areas that fruited after the rain, and they were delightful. They were big, they were fresh, they were totally clean because they popped up after the rain. But normally you don't want a heavy burn. It's unusual to find things. Instead, you want the opposite. You want to find shade, and you want to find no burn to medium burn. So what we have in here under our optional overlay, we have here it is, burn severity. And we make these by, we get an infrared picture of before the burn, which, are available from the USDA or something like that. And then we get a picture after the burn, and infrared bounces off the leaves differently. So we're able to tell loss of green in the leaves. And we score it a severity based on that. And sometimes we don't get a score. And the reason is, especially with late fires, late in the year, if snow puts them out, we can't really get the green very well. It messes up the infrared. Or if it's been really smoky over the fire or overcast, we need a clear satellite picture. Last year, for instance, we could only get about half of our burns we could get burn severity on. This year, we got most of them. And here it is. So you've got these really red and purple areas that are moderate and high severity. Those are going to be less likely to find, morels in. And then you've got the green and the yellow and the orange, which are great. And by the way, green is great. Even though it says unburned, the fire still ran through there. It just ran under the trees and didn't affect the canopy. It's shady. It's still like killed trees. It still caused death and destruction in there, and there's still burn morels. So green is great. Don't let the unburned fool you. And often the edges, anytime there's a red area, all the edges often will be really good. I think maybe it's because they killed the trees, so the mushrooms are going to grow after the trees are dead, but they're next to a place that's shady, so they have the right conditions. So it's moister and shadier, so that can also help. But this is something to look at, and if you find a fire that is really highly burned, your chances of finding morels in it kind of go down. So, here's one here that's a little more burned. In this area here looks a little suspect, but there's still plenty of places to go. Even with all the splotchy splotchy spots, I would still want to visit this fire. It still looks good, but it can help you plan. So that's how we create that. And those are things that we made. Sometimes you can find burn severity maps for the big fires online because the Forest Service will create them. There's a special name for that. I'm drawing a blank, but if you look it up, we have a blog post on our website about how I made those and what those are called and what we look at if you want to kind of read more about the burn severity and how they're scored. I also have a blog post on the Morel probability and how those are scored if you want to read more about that. Now we do like to pick clean. I see some comments in there. It's funny, I hear people, and I feel like they're people that don't know better. They're like, oh, burn morels are awful. They taste smoky. And that's one thing I've never thought and I don't eat a lot of morels, first of all, let's be honest. I used to. But I don't eat morels anymore. I'm totally allergic to them. But I pick them and I taste them and I still eat them. Not anymore. No, I've given up eating them. But I tried for a long time. That's a whole nother story. But burn morels, if you buy a morel in a store that's dried, like a restaurant would buy it, or you buy it, you know, in a commercial sense, they're almost always burn morels. So they tend to be across the entire market because it's just how it works. That's what commercial pickers focus on, and that's the vast majority of morels are burn morels. I think what happens sometimes is people pick the ashy ones that are like obviously super dirty, and they dry them up and they rehydrate them and eat them, and there's still a lot of ash in them. So there's 2 or 3 things you can do. Number one is when you pick them, don't pick into a plastic bucket, because when you pick into a plastic bucket, everything just kind of falls down onto the ones below it. Nothing escapes. We like to pick into mesh bags. I don't think because we're trying to spread spores, but you'll notice if you pick into a bucket and you start digging out, the bottom layer is totally filthy. It's weird. They're totally dirty. The second thing is when we pick, we have our mushroom knife with a brush on it, you know, it's like this, little brush. And we clean our mushrooms when we pick them. And then we take them home and like put them on the picnic table. We always have pictures of us at picnic tables with piles of mushrooms. And it's not because we're piling out to take pictures. It's because when we get back, we pile them up and we go through them all again and we clean them up, right? And it's because we're eating them. Like I'm not a commercial picker. Like commercial pickers don't care, I don't think. And the third thing is when we see really dirty, ashy mushrooms, like we don't really pick them. I mean, sometimes you're desperate and you're like, okay, I'm gonna pick these. And you can wash them after you pick them. You can run them through like a one works good as a salad spinner. Put them in a salad spinner, wash the heck out of them. You get a lot of sand, a lot of ash off of them. And then after that, you've got to put them back out under a fan and let them get back to the way you put them, the way that the level of dryness before the salad spinner. Got to kind of slow dry them under air, and then you can dehydrate them. If you dehydrate them when they're wet, they turn black and nasty. And I think that's because you're steaming them, or you're not dehydrating them. But you can wash them. I would prefer not to, though. I would prefer just to pick clean. If I'm finding dirty ones, I'm just going to go somewhere where they're clean, which means you're getting out of ash and you're picking in a clean environment, which I'll show you pictures of here in just a little bit. All right. Where was I? We were looking at burn severity, talking about ashy mushrooms, and hey, you want to avoid those. Don't believe it when people say they don't taste as good as other mushrooms. I think that just means they were picking dirty ones. And you could just say that about naturals too. Like, well, you know, the good thing about burn morels, they usually don't have bugs in them. So you're not getting bugs either. But you know, pick clean. Now, the other thing now is forest type. I did something interesting. Forest is, you're going to want mixed conifer. Generally speaking, it seems like the best trees are the true firs. So here's what I did. I have this tree map, and this is available to our members as well. This is a tree species map, and this is going to let you pick any species you want. And by the way, I have Douglas fir up here is unchecked. And all I've done is check 3 types of fir trees in here: grand fir, subalpine fir, and white fir. I think you could just do all firs too, all true firs. And it's interesting. I don't know if you notice this map here. This is basically 3 fir types. And I could go up, sorry about that, everybody. I'm a little heavy-handed here. Oh my gosh, I'm totally heavy-handed. And now I lost my map. So that'll come. There's a lot of data. So this map always takes a minute to load. I'm just going to go ahead and check next. I'm going to check fir species, which will give us all of them. The map doesn't change much. And what I've noted is that all these places where we do really well for burn morels have firs, true firs. Now, I don't think they're exclusive to true firs. I have found them with pine trees, ponderosa pines, and I know other people have found them with other pines. We've found them with Doug firs. They seem to love cedar trees too. And at the end of the day, my advice is you want to find a mixed conifer forest. And the mixed conifer will anywhere out here in the West, short of maybe some places in California, is typically going to have true firs in it growing. And they love that. But they will grow with ponderosas, they will grow with Doug firs, they will grow with other pines. I think, the part of the reason we find them where we find them is the firs and the cedars, I think, often grow in the kind of moisture of the two environments. So if you're in Colorado and you're looking at a north face and a south face, like the subalpine firs are in the right place. The cooler habitat, higher elevations, but regardless, they love fur. So you can't go wrong chasing firs, looking for morels. But I'm going to say they're not exclusive. The one thing that I do note is when people say they were in like a Doug fir forest or a ponderosa forest where there's nothing, where they're like a monolithic tree type, that's probably my least favorite. I feel like it's that mixed conifer that is going to be the real kind of sweet spot for us. So in this map, you can find whatever kind of conifer species you want. Whether that's, I have pines and spruces and larch and hemlock and cedar and redwood. Doug firs up here at the top also, if you want to get those. So there's a lot of options available to you here. Let me just bring that down again a little bit. For this tree species map. Now back, to make it a little bit easier for you, back in our main mushroom map, I'm going to zoom out again. There we go. I have a Forest Service type. This reduces the forest to approximately 25 different forest types. And you can see, there's red, white, pine, jack groups. There's a spruce fir group, which you're going to find that out in let me zoom out. You're going to find that out here in Colorado more predominantly. There's the pinyon juniper group, which is no good. The Douglas fir group, so this will help a little bit, help you kind of suss in on the type of trees. Here's that habitat change in California where it goes to the kind of mixed California conifer group. And this is a bit of a blunt tool, but I think it will help you know, like if something is in this dark brown, it's really going to be no good. It's not going to be prime territory. Lodgepole pine, I don't get so excited about lodgepole either. Not to say you wouldn't find it there, but I don't get excited about it. I think that probably the tree that we hunt the most, that we get the most excited about, and it's probably because of where we hunt, is going to be this grand fir. We love those. Now, you're not going to find that in Colorado. But really the other one is this white fir is pretty awesome too. So maybe those two trees, but here's the grand fir map, which really shows you they love this tree. It grows on the eastern slope of the Cascades. It goes all through the Blue Mountains, and it goes all the way up here into Montana and Idaho even, or Idaho and Montana even. This little western portion up here is pretty cool too. There's good mushrooms up in there, and it slides up that grand fir does. So we really like the grand fir. It's one of our favorite trees, and one of the cool things about it is also the spring porcini likes it too. So sometimes when you're out hunting burn morels, especially if you get out of where the burn happened, you can find that spring porcini, the Boletus rex veris, which is just absolutely delish. So that's a fun one. Okay, so that is the tree maps if you want to look for trees. Specific other tree factors, I would say in Arizona, I think you're going to want to focus on there's a lot of Doug firs there. And I think there I would probably look more into the Doug fir. It's often Doug fir or ponderosa. There's a few other tree types, but I think in Arizona you're going to want to look. They even divide. Sometimes some tree maps divide the forest there into the moist fir and the dry fir. you want the moist fur. I don't really know how they classify it, but it's just a more moist area. I think it's more north facing and higher elevation. In Colorado, we see the ponderosas and Doug firs at lower elevations. And then when you get to the subalpine fir and the Engelmann spruce fir, that's when the mushrooms really get good. Now, you'll still find them down in the pines and the ponderosas, and the lodgepoles are mixed in there often as well. But gosh, we did the best in the subalpine fir and the Engelmann spruce on the kind of western side of Colorado, and those carry into Utah. That's a nice tree. Okay. Also, we have disturbance morels in here. I just got to mention, in our maps, we include stewardship maps in here. And so you can check these and these. I'll just turn off the fire perimeters here. So you can just see now what we're looking at is places where they've done logging. And logging is an exciting alternative to burn morel hunting. They tend to be less people there, but they can the mushrooms can really do well in logged areas, especially again fir trees. It seems to be one of the favorites. But if you want to kind of get off of the burns and try something new, try these logging maps. The other thing that works are prescribed burns. I'm hoping to add that next year, a specific prescribed burn section. They are sometimes in these stewardship maps. They'll show you where they did prescribed burns. But a prescribed burn can be just as good as a actual forest fire. They can fruit tremendously, and often they're not as kind of regulated with closures and stuff. So I'm excited next year to try to make prescribed burns one of our featured maps. That's one of the big things I'm working on this year, trying to add. All right, we're getting near the end. I'm going to go a little bit longer. I was going to show this is now we're going to talk about we're done with our armchair research. We've decided where to go. We're in our car. We're driving into the woods, and I drove into this fire a couple of years back, and we didn't do well. We got like a couple gallons in a couple hours. Not what we wanted. We left. And when we drove through it, you can kind of see it here. Look at the spacing between the trees in this map. You can see all the ground. And the fire just kind of ran down through it real quick. It didn't create a lot of kind of destruction. It was maybe a little sunny. So I think we want to find something that looks like this before the burn. This is also in Oregon where you can see really dense stands of trees. And that's going to produce better for you. Where these dense trees burned usually is what we would prefer to see as we're doing our satellite research before the burn. Usually when you're looking at satellite pictures from Google, you're seeing pictures from before the burn. Increasingly over the years, and this year I've noticed even more noticeably that often the satellite pictures now show the burn. So they're updating their satellite maps within 6 months, where it used to be they only updated, they were always like 6 months to a year old. Now they're updating them more frequently. So now when you go look at a fire on like the Google satellite view, you might actually see the burn in there, which can be helpful. You can gauge your own burn severity and see where the shady spots are. We always want to have several options pre-scouted. And that's because roads can be closed, whether they're gated or sometimes there's a washout or some other natural disturbance. We always want to have a few ways to get into the fire. We want to have some places where we're going to try to be able to test different elevations and aspects. I would prefer anytime we're going somewhere to say, hey, the first day is for scouting. Like we're not if we need more than one day in a burn, we want to have one day just to hit different elevations and aspects and really find the mushrooms. Now that said, I feel like we usually find them in the first half day and we're on to them. But sometimes you got to look around, and when you go through these fires, I think depending how comfortable you are, some people like to just drive, and they, like, hey, when do you stop and look? And they're like, I look when I see morels outside of my car window. We like to get out and walk prospective areas. We walk very quickly. These things are easy to spot. It's not an Eastern morel or Midwest morel that hides. These are easy to spot. So we're walking very quick and we're looking for giant quantities of them. Here's an example of a fire where we didn't find many. It's pretty dry here, but the problem is this is too sunny. There's still some needles on the tree. It's a little brown on the ground where the needles have fallen. It's kind of like middle ground, like this could be okay. This is not like severely burned, but it's a little too burned. It's a little too sunny in here for the year we were there and we didn't find any. Now you drive up the road, this is like perfect right here. There's all those needles on the ground. So the mushrooms that pop up through the needles are going to be very clean. They're not going to be ashy. There's a lot of shade. There's a lot of trees that have been killed. This is a nice looking area. This is where we would get out and walk through out of our car and check it out. This is even better. I love this picture because compared to the last one, there's some green areas over there, which I like to see, some living areas. There's a lot of little trees that have been kind of killed, and they're going to be down here under these little trees. By the morels don't care, big or little. If a tree dies, there can be morels under it. There's a lot of shade in here. If you look real close, right in the middle, right here, if you can see I think you can see my cursor. There's a little red spot. That's Kristen. She's like down on her knees picking morels, and there's a whole bunch in here you can't see from this picture because I was standing back, but this was a very productive area for us, which is why I took that picture. Here's a spring porcini popping up out of a burn. Very unusual. We've only seen that once where it popped up after, in this case, it was I think a prescribed fire. There was still smoke in the background. It had just happened, but it was kind of cool. A few of our favorite things we like to take with us. Walkie-talkies we think are important. We hate yelling in the woods. I feel like a walkie-talkie to have with your hunting partners is really one of the best safety devices you can have. Wet wipes and hand lotion. Your hands get filthy. They look like that. And you're going to want to be able to clean them off and get some lotion on them. Those mushroom spores are very hard on your fingers and are very abrasive. And if you do more than one day, you're going to really appreciate having wet wipes and hand lotion. I like a hanging basket like that to hang them in to kind of help the air circulating and start getting them clean. There we are cleaning them before we put them into our basket. I noticed they're pretty clean already. We picked clean. A chainsaw is a nice safety device because sometimes trees fall when it's windy. We get out of the woods. I'll talk about that in the last slide. Take a lot of extra bags. Take bags that have shoulder straps, or you can put into your backpack, because once you start picking, they get very heavy and they're very hard on your arms to walk a few miles carrying 20 pounds of mushrooms. So there's that. Sometimes you find these little hopper bugs on your mushrooms. These are not burrowing into the mushroom. They're just hanging out on the outside. They're pretty harmless. Okay, finally, the last big topic are permits. You pretty much need a permit anywhere you hunt in the Forest Service land. I will tell you there's no rule. Anybody that tells you what the permit is probably wrong. And the reason is every Forest Service has its own permit. Some are free, some cost money, some allow you to keep whole mushrooms, some make you cut them in half unless you buy a commercial permit. Some have commercial permits that go by the pound, some have commercial permits that go by the day, some are $20 for a week, or some are $20 for 60 pounds. They're all different. So the only way to know is look at where you're hunting, and you've got to go look on that Forest Service site and determine what is the legality of hunting here. Do I need a permit? What are the rules if I don't have a permit versus if I do have a permit? Because some will allow you to pick up a gallon or 5 gallons without a permit. Look at the rules, but they're always local. Anybody that tells you the rule is wrong because they're different in every forest. I mean, some happen to be the same, but they're different. You've got to go almost 9 out of 10 Forest Service require you to show up in person to get a permit. You've got to go to a ranger station. Ranger stations 9 out of 10 times are only open Monday through Friday. They usually close at 5, and often they won't issue permits if you come in after 4 or 4:30. So get there before they close. And that permit is only good for that particular Forest Service. So those are the rules around permits, and I think we're kind of done. I wanted to wrap up with this picture. This is a really big blanket. It has 234 pounds of morels on it, and these were seized at Crater Lake the weekend of July 4th. Now, we were there just north of the Crater Lake, 2 weeks, no, a month before that. And you could just tell it was perfect. It was about 6,000 feet. We were finding them at like 4 to 4 or 5. When we went up to 6, and it was, the snow had just melted, and it was gonna look great up there. Well, a lot of people went up there and they hunted inside the park, and there's a lot of tickets being written by the rangers that weekend. And this was a picture in the newspaper. So be careful, folks. Don't go picking national parks. It's not cool. And I think that might be, oh, I have a safety slide. Hey, wind is not your friend in these. There's dead trees. You don't want to be in a windy forest with dead trees. Also, rain is really dangerous because flash floods happen when there's a lot of forest kill like this, and washed out roads happen. I think day to day, the most dangerous thing are the deep hidden holes where the trees burn all the way down through the stump and into the roots, and you'll be walking along, there'll be these big holes that you can step into, break a leg, twist an ankle, extend a knee. That's probably the most likely injury, is to stepping in a hole. The second one might be picking after a big rain and being on a steep slope and sliding. That could also be pretty dangerous. Notice all the pine needles right here on the ground, but there's fir trees in the distance. That is not a morel. Hopefully you know morels. I'm not going to get into what is and what isn't a morel today, but I think it's important, if you don't know what this is, make sure you learn what a gyrometra is and what a verpa is, and which ones are edible and which ones are not. A little bit of etiquette. I mean, don't leave any trash, I think, is the top one. Hey, take a bag and pick up other people's trash. Be courteous to people, steer clear of other hunters. Often they're friendly and nice, but sometimes people just want to be left alone. Don't kind of step in front of where they're picking. Share your catch. I love that. Like, get a bunch, give them to your friends, share them out. These are nature's bounty. Let some other people appreciate them, and be generous with your mushrooms. Take someone new. It's not a secret spot. Frankly, it's safer to go with a carload of people, but just take walkie-talkies so you don't lose anybody. At a minimum, take whistles. Okay, so now I'm down. I think that's it. We're down to the Q&A. There we are on our e-bikes, going up deeper into a burn. That was in Oregon, and there's a beautiful bird's nest. That was in Colorado, blue eggs in it. Now, one question is why they happen. I think that's interesting. It's pretty much unknown. Clearly, though, burn morels only happen after a burn. We think that they are hanging out in the forest for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years in around the roots of trees. They're technically not mycorrhizal, so they're not in the roots between the cells, like ectomycorrhizal, or within the cells, endomycorrhizal. Instead, they're kind of in the, let's call it the tree root biome. They're just hanging out there with the roots, happy as can be, just enjoying their life down there, and that tree dies. For some reason, it's not enough that the tree's cut down. It's got to burn. So there must be something additional, like a chemistry involved. But that tree dies in the summer, and those mycelium create something called sclerotia, which are like little walnuts, and they sit down there with the roots over the winter. And then come spring, when conditions are right, those sclerotia form little pins that become mushrooms. Now, it takes 2 weeks to form the pins. So the conditions have to be right. And then I think it's got to be right for 2 weeks for the pins to start. And then after the pins start, the mushrooms come out another 2 weeks later. So there's like a 4-week window. And that's why I'm like, I like to see rain. I think, like, why it doesn't happen until the snow melts a month. I think there's something about the snow melts, the sclerotia, like, okay, it's time. They spend 2 weeks putting up their pins, but if they don't have enough rain between that and the full mushrooms in 4 weeks, something like backs it up and they don't actually happen. So that's kind of the lifestyle of the morel. But why is it because of the chemistry of the ash? Is it because everything else got killed, so there's less competition in the soil because of the burn? I don't know. But what those sclerotia do is, after the tree dies, they and the mycelium start pulling nutrient out of the dead tree roots. and that's what causes the mushrooms to flush. So they're not mycorrhizal, they're just kind of living happily with the trees. And then once the trees died, they almost become, they live off the dead trees. What are those? Saprophobic? I forget the right word. And they fruit mushrooms based on eating dead tree roots. Those mushrooms send spores around, they fall down into the forest and where the live trees are again, and they spend the next 50 or 100 years hanging out until there's another fire. Pretty odd. But I think there's more mystery than answers in there. But there is something interesting too, that the Burn Morels are also one of the species that they cultivate. Like many Morels can't be grown. Burn Morels are the one or two types that can. I think the other type is called a landscape Morel. So that's pretty interesting. We talked about Arizona. I see some questions on that. We talked about species and regions. We talked about thinning and logging activity, how those are not burn morels, but they can be very good for natural morels, especially the Morchella schneideri out here in the West. The age of the tree stand, I don't think it makes a difference. No. I think, we usually see them in a mixed forest, mixed conifer forest, where they're kind of were full-grown trees and baby trees mixed together. So somehow there's something about that natural tree versus an area that has been logged in the past and replanted with one tree species doesn't seem to be as abundant. But no, I don't know that the age of the tree stand makes a difference. I'm not saying it doesn't, but I haven't been able to figure that one out. Do gyrometers show up before, after, or during? Well, I don't think they show up in the burns. We've never really seen them in the burns, but I feel like the gyrometra show up earlier than morels and burn morels, and often maybe even earlier than natural morels. So I'm going to say gyrometra. If you see them, you probably need to go higher in elevations, or sorry, lower. Same thing with verpas. If we see those, often I feel like we're too high, like the verpas come up before the burn morels do. I think probably though there's different species of gyrometra, so maybe it also depends on what state you're in and what species we're talking about. Here in Michigan, yes, you only heard about the western burn morels, but some of the eastern morels have been found in northern Michigan, the burn morels. I'm going to say, watch out. I've got an article I've written up. I'm going to publish it hopefully this week on eastern burn morels and what kind of tree species they've been found with. I have a hunch they're more common than we know. It's just the forest fires in the east are less common, and a lot of people are discouraged because they're looking in the wrong states and the wrong trees. So that's what I'm going to talk about, is what I think, how they work. Because we have seen people get hundreds and hundreds of pounds of burn morels in the east. I mean, not a lot, but there are definitely documented cases of that happening. And there you go. Yeah, you found gyrometra in California in highly burned areas. Yeah, see, I think that's, again, this kind of local thing. Like, I don't know a lot about the California scene there and the gyrometras. So that probably is a very localized thing, gyrometra, where you live and what grows there and how they coincide with burns. So thank you. I think we're about wrapped here. If I don't see any other questions in here, do you hunt in basins? Yes, I like basins. I like in the drier areas where we like to hunt later in the season. I love at the bottom of a hill, like, water runs downhill. So when you get to near the bottom of a hill, often that edge at the bottom holds the most moisture, whether that's snow melt or rain. It also happens to be a nice shady area. So if that's what you mean by a basin, like a lower area with hills on the side of it. Likewise, I feel like I'm always disappointed at the top of a ridge. I mean, not that they don't grow there, but often we'll work up a hill. We'll be picking them going up the hill. When you get to the top and kind of level off, it feels like we find less mushrooms there. And I think maybe because the wind blows and it dries out quicker there. I don't know why. Maybe in the early season when it's sunnier up there, it's better. But Alan, I don't know if that's what you meant by basin. So hopefully I answered that question. Do these fruit later than all the other morels? Yes, they do. They seem to always follow the naturals. Commercial hunters tend to hunt naturals and logging morels before they move on to burn morels. And then interestingly, often the commercial scene dries up later in the summer because the buyers go away. Because when you pick a morel in middle July, it's really hard to keep it cool from the pick to the van, to the airport, to the buyer, they're really hard to stay fresh. So often that when you go later in the season, there's not a lot of commercial hunters. So you have these beautiful tomentoses to yourself at higher elevations because there's just not the same demand. Oddly enough, they're worth more to commercial buyers at that time because they're harder to get, but they're much riskier for buyers. And a lot of buyers are done. Like they do not want to. The worst thing a buyer can do is, buy 100 pounds of your morels and then have them go bad while they're being shipped or transported, and they just don't have the shelf life. So I think later in the season, that's another magical reason to pick later in the season. Okay, good questions. Kristen, does she eat and share? We give a lot of them away. Like I'm a good friend to have when it comes to morels because we'll go picking. I don't want yours and you can have mine. We give a lot away to friends and family. Unfortunately, because I don't eat them and we're cooking together, she's really excited when there's morels on the menu because, we don't do it together. I'm like, no, let's eat porcini, or we have to like cook separately because I've gotten to the point where I could eat a couple morels, but just the idea of it makes me sick. So no, she needs more morels in her life, or rather on her plate. I should probably make them for her. All right, Donna's the same way. Yeah, you don't stomach them either. Great. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate all the kind words. We'll put this recording online in the next 24 to 48 hours. So, discount code NAMA, NAMA. If you go purchase it on the site, those 4 letters will get you a $9 discount. And then next year, say you can renew at $25 at our renewal rate, which I think will be the same next year. And hope to see you out there, guys. Was there another question? I don't see black loggers. Oh, black loggers. That means black loggers are the black morels that grow in logged areas. Those Morchella snyderi turn, as they get older, they turn really dark, and as they start kind of light colored and they hit the sun and they turn black and they're beautiful. They're delicious mushrooms. I guess my friend Robert Underwood introduced me to he called them black loggers. And I was like, yeah, that's perfect. That's what they are, black loggers. So that somehow became part of my vocabulary.
The discount code is just NAMA.
Yep, the discount code is just NAMA, and that's in there. All right, and great. Also, thanks everybody for being a member of NAMA. If you're not a member, hey, you should be. It's awesome. All right, good night, everybody.